celebrations are very important. And this year, the theme is Our Power and Our Planet. And with this, I give a brief introduction of Dr. Shalini Dhyani. She is a principal scientist at CSIR NEERI, that is the National Environment and Engineering Institute located at Nagpur. She is one of the globally recognized experts in ecosystem management and nature-based solutions. And she has done a lot of work as a vice chair, Asia's vice chair of IUCN Commissions on Ecosystems Management. And she is holding this chair since 2020, I suppose, Shalini. I'm not sure about it. I've seen your works. And she is a visiting scientist at the Center for International Forestry Research and as a lead author for major global assessment works. Her work is very interesting. Basically, she bridges how the science, policy, and bring the combination of the both and promote sustainable development and resilience in urban and ecological systems. So this is a very important sector, and it's very uh, good that we have Dr. Shalini over here, and she will throw an insight onto how the national nature-based solutions are important for resilient future urban development, and which is a challenge faced by every urban center in India. So I invite Dr. Shalini Dhyani to take the session forward and share her valuable insights with us. Yes, Shalini, it's over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Deepa. Thank you, Dr. Sonia. It's a proud privilege for me as well to be here with GES platform, speaking on the very special day of Earth Day. And I'm sure all the audience who are slowly joining in, they understand the relevance of the importance of Earth Day. And I think it's very, very crucial. We all, right from the March onwards, have been facing the heat of summers. Nagpur is in the very much in the center of the country, and we're already at 40, 45 degrees centigrade. And this is a challenge because we know every passing year, we are now seeing the lot of these concerns of increasing heat islands in the country, and also increasing temperature is not something very good. Uh, there, of course, a lot of anthropogenic interventions are also there. So with this, I will start my presentation. I'm very glad to see also Dr. Farida Tampal here in the audience, and many others who I know as about the work that they do in their own domains. And I've been quite watching their space. Also, Dr. Deepa. It feels like kind of homecoming because I started my initial career very briefly. I worked in Gujarat, also in Kutch, and was very close to my heart. So with this very small warming words for you in Gujarat, while the heat is taking up the entire country, I share my slides and just confirm me that I am visible, and also my slides are visible to all of you. Is this visible to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. So here we go for the World Earth Day. And through my work that I think after I left Gujarat and joined NEERI in 2013, September, this was the very first time I started looking for urban areas because so far I've been always working in natural setups. For my work started in Himalayas, and then later on, I also started being some initial work on mangroves in Gujarat. So I think this urban reality was a big hit to me when I came to Nagpur and I started seeing that nature thrives also in urban areas and how nature can be taken up as a biggest empowering solution to all of us that if we use very rationally can really help us to solve a lot of these challenges. So that's why I am going to talk about solving the urban conundrum and how nature-based solution can help India especially to develop a resilient, sustainable, and also climate adaptive future.
Yeah, Dr.
So for
Shalini, yeah, sorry to interrupt you. We are not able to see. We are not able to see the slide, ma'am.
you're not able to see my slides?
No, no, no.
Let me reshare.
Can you reshare? Yeah, please reshare it.
Yeah, I'll reshare them. I have to share the entire screen. And is it visible now? You are
Yes,
on
ma'am.
mute.
It
Yeah.
is visible now, ma'am. You
And
can
it's
just make it
scrolling
full
also.
screen.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
scrolling
yes,
also.
yes.
It's full screen. It's full screen
All
at the
right.
moment.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, yeah. Good to go, ma'am.
So, yeah. So coming back to the topic on World Earth Day, we know that the theme for this year is our power, our planet. That means there has to be a lot of focus on renewables. While we focus a lot on renewables, we also need to ensure that the kind of energy, the kind of requirement we have to lead this urban life, how can we reduce them and how we can ensure that we have more planet friendly, nature friendly lifestyle that can reduce our stress in urban areas and also help develop the kind of cities that we want our children and our future generations to live in. We already know that there is a huge lot of concern right now for India. We are one of the fast urbanizing country in the world, and at the same time, all these concerns are very relevant, and we need to understand that Earth Day, every Earth Day, we need to not only celebrate that day or any other environment day, but also ensure that the kind of motives, the kind of intents, and kind of our efforts and work are very much aligned with these themes and aspirations. So this has been one of my very important slide. If you see globally, there is a huge global consensus on healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. You talk about climate change, you talk about disaster risk reduction, you talk about biodiversity, or you also talk about sustainable development goals. It's very important that nature has been in the center stage of this entire conversation. We are talking about healthy ecosystems, we are talking about the species, we're talking about the land that is restored so that we can get the benefits for healthy planet and also larger human well-being. So for resilience building, it's also important that our efforts are inclusive, they're very appropriate and also proactive. And if you know about nature-based solution, we have very less time because the carbon budget for planet is also already going to be depleted, going to offshoot by 2030. So we have just 6 years. And if you see the kind of development we are facing, it's high time. It's more than high time that we think about including these concerns at a very local household level. When I talk about sustainable development goals, I think I need to put this emphasis today on healthy cities and sustainable cities. And as you know, these sustainable development goals were launched in 2015. They are already midway, more than midway. And it is talking about inclusive growth, cultural and natural heritage preservation, resilience against disasters, green and public spaces, rural and urban linkages, and also ensuring that we have resilient buildings for future. Now, Sustainable Development Goal 11 has a huge interlinkage with all the different kind of other sustainable development goals that highlights that the role of green and blue infrastructure in the city is very relevant to be preserved than any other aspect. Now, if you see the global development, I'm sure we all are knowing the kind of development urban growth is happening across the world per hour. If you see the statistics that are there, that are showing already that world is heading towards 70% of urbanization. And by 2050, or maybe even before, we'll be living in an area, we'll live in a world where demographic, economic, and environmental changes will be very fast, very much integrated, and will have a very huge impact on our lives and maybe the impact of our future generations as well. Now, this is a very old picture that I'm showing you is about the build-up area across India in 2014, almost a decade back. And if you see the kind of development at that time, almost a decade back, we can see at that time was about 28% of India's population living in cities. And this much of population almost 2 decades back is now growing exponentially and is already expected to have crossed 60% by now. So we are more of an urbanized nation where there are very sparse or rare rural presence. And most of these rural areas are very poor, and that's why there is a huge lot of migration happening to urban areas for livelihood, education, better health, better life, and so on and so forth. Now, if you know that in India, every 10 years census happens. And after 2011, I'm not sure if we have received the final census report, but every census brings more tier 2 and tier 1 cities in the country. So there's a graduation kind of a ceremony where every census is adding more tier 2 and tier 3 cities to the country. So India is one of the fastest urbanizing country in the world. And this is a very, very important concern for the people who talk about environment, who talk about conservation. Now, it's just not a city development. Indian cities have no more boundaries kind of thing, where you know that most of the cities are actually eating up peri-urban areas and also rural buffers. So a lot of support that comes from rural areas is and peri-urban areas to the cities in terms of water, in terms of clean environment, in terms of good air, is also slowly and gradually depleting. So that is also an important concern to be taken into discussion that why our cities are expanding in a way where you are seeing more high rises coming to the outsides of the city and peri-urban and also now rural areas. Now, while urbanization has been challenged for the entire world, we should not undermine the opportunity it provides to manage ecosystem services and also harness the co-benefits of these ecosystem services. There was this interesting report by BNHS, and I'm sure people living in Mumbai, people living in Bangalore, people living in Nagpur, we all acknowledge all these beautiful biodiversity, some of the endangered elements thriving in our localities, in our neighborhood. So this is some of the underestimation that most of these charismatic, flagship, and very important species of biodiversity are only thriving in protected areas. Many of them are also living in the campuses, urban areas, the urban forest areas, the reserve forest in urban areas, and so on and so forth. Now, we started, when I came to Nagpur, this was in 2013, and I started seeing what can be done in our campus because ours is about 48 hectares of green campus. That means I have a good biodiversity, good greenery around me in the heart of the city where there are big, high heat islands. My campus still observe about 3 degrees of less temperature than the outer Nagpur. And there was this interesting publication from Wildlife Institute of India last year that said that biodiversity significance of small habitat patches because more than half of Indian birds are basically in now academic campuses. Now this shows that there should be more proactive interest and conservation efforts in urban green spaces that are protected. This can be campuses, this can be academic institutions, and so on and so forth. So they are not only indirectly improving microclimate, they're not only reducing air and noise issues, but they are also addressing a lot of place-based attachment, connection of people to nature, and also giving them a lot of cultural benefits in these areas. So we are NIRI, one of the oldest scientific organizations, CSR laboratory in the country. It came into picture right after independence when there was cholera in the country, especially in Delhi. And that's when Pandit Nehru decided that India should have a research organization working on wastewater. But thanks to our very visionary prime minister at that time in 1974, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who thought that India doesn't have just wastewater issues. There are n number of other environmental issues that are posed on the country, and that's why it was renamed as NIRI in 1974. So now, as I mentioned, we have a 48 hectare of urban jungle in the heart of the city. And we started our work in 2013, 2014, and now we are expanding. And last almost 7 to 8 years, we have expanded our work to Nagpur, to Faridabad, and to other cities in the country. And if you see such a beautiful campus, even just pictures can give you a glimpse of how wilderness thrives in this campus. We have so much of these interesting biodiversity in the campus that fulfills our desire to go inside the forest. When a ray enters the forest and when you see all these interesting biodiversity, it definitely makes your day. So in 2015, we came up with a very interactive portal with different kind of biodiversity. We had around 180 plants and then almost 70, 75 birds and butterflies. And this biodiversity portal was a huge hit for the organization and people living in urban areas to get one kind of a small stop shop to understand what these species are, what is so important about them, how we can watch them, and what is so relevant in terms of the benefits they provide us. So this was one of the initial activity, and we started watching the vibrant hues in our campus, and we still do that in last almost 10 years, we keep watching them and keep monitoring that phenological changes that are happening, the kind of microhabitat these trees are providing to our birds, butterflies, pollinators, and so on and so forth. And we started doing rigorous sampling by researchers, putting up long-term ecological modeling in about 48 hectare and divided uh, the entire campus into grids where we observe each and every tree in terms of carbon stock, in terms of microhabitat, the services, and so on and so forth. So now in 10 years, you can see the drastic changes that we have been observing. So somebody who started work in 2007 and now what kind of results? We have around 83 trees on our campus. That was so surprising. A campus of just 48 hectares is holding 83 tree species. And it was not just trees. Any tree, there were a combination of both native and introduced species, and we have some of the important IUCN red listed species also in the campus. So that means that campus can be a very good place as a other area-based conservation approach that can be promoted across India. And we have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of these campuses that can be enlisted under OECMs. Now we move a little bit ahead and we started observing each and every tree to understand what all it is providing in terms of supporting services. And we were surprised that trees with larger diameter were accommodating diverse and most microhabitat. So these were diverse habitats in terms of cavities, rot holes, crown, insect galleries. So you can see all these things on some of the trees and most of the trees. So this became a very important thing for us to observe that it's just not tree that is adding a biodiversity. Every tree is a whole lot of a kind of combination of biodiversity habitats that it's providing. We started seeing the fungal diversity in the campus and we found that there are about more than 20 species of more than 20 genera of these macrofungi thriving in our campus. So there was this additional work that we started doing. And of course, this is something that you can see across India in different campuses. And we started also observing and regular monitoring of bird and butterfly diversity, not only for eBird, but also for our own good to understand, because NEERI has a lot of multidisciplinary scientists. So they also had this interest to understand what is in their neighborhood and surroundings. So these are all these colors. Now coming to the relevance and nature-based solution that this campus is providing. And if you see the campus of just 48 hectare has so much in terms of land surface temperature. If you see these green spaces have a lot and they reduce a lot of temperature than the outside neighborhood temperature. So if you see the neighborhood temperature is around 35 or something or 40 or something, this campus is around 29 and 35. So even though it's very high summertime, most of the people around Nagpur are using air conditioners. A lot of families in the quarters that we live in are still not using air conditioners, still not using water coolers or air coolers to keep us cooler. So this is because of the kind of ambience that we have to reduce the temperature. So this is one of a very local example of how nature-based solutions, especially green infrastructure, can help you. And then we started looking to the kind of benefits. So we developed an index that's called as total value index for trees in urban areas, while almost 7 to 8 years back, we only were observing the provisioning benefits and also cultural services. Now we are integrating regulating ecosystem services and supporting ecosystem services, because we also have carbon stock for many parts of Nagpur and also our campus. And we brought in this interesting publication on urban foraging. So that ensures a lot of connect of people to local neighborhood. And this is something that also inculcates a sense of belongingness. So urban foraging is not something very uh, uh, rocket science. This is something that you see in your street markets. I remember when I was in Gujarat, I started observing these street vendors, vegetable markets, and you see a lot of this is actually coming from urban area. If you see the moringa leaves or the moringa pods or some of these shoots in across different cities of India, I observed a lot of this is coming for income diversification or for provisioning benefits. That is supporting local livelihood also coming from urban areas. So this is a very good example of urban foraging. And we also saw during COVID that it's not only reducing food miles, carbon footprint, it's also inculcating a sense of belongingness, improving green and natural infrastructure, because people don't want to cut a certain tree because that provides them benefits. And I also see that there is a lot of opportunity in generating these kind of terminology that can connect next generation, can connect older generation, and have a more intergenerational partnerships for restoration, resilience building, conservation, food security, health and psychological benefits, and so on and so forth. So this is basically reimagining conservation and moving from concepts to more eco-civilization approach. And this is one of my favorite images. I'm not sure how many of you can relate to the person in the picture and this lake, but this is East Kolkata wetland, the first man-made wetland that is a Ramsar, got notified by Ramsar. And this is an excellent example of how constructed wetland can not only treat sewage, but also reduce your co-benefits. So the fishes that come to the market, and also a lot of vegetables that they come to the market for last 4 to 5 decades have been supported by East Kolkata wetland. So the person is Dhrupjyoti Ghosh. She was IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management South Asia Regional Chair before almost, I think, 2010 or sometime. And he has really ensured that this constructed wetland is supported and conserved. And that's why he brought in this effort to make it a Ramsar site. Of late, what is happening, there is a lot of encroachment happening, industrialization that is leading to a lot of heavy metal coming in. But I am sure you all can acknowledge the nature and the beauty of nature to treat the sewage and provide a lot of co-benefit. While we use RO in our homes to treat the water that we drink. So it just can be done by the solar or sun rays that are coming on Earth, not to use any more energy and reduce our energy footprint by these kind of technologies. Now, we also observed during COVID that home gardens are moderating a lot of relationship between COVID-induced stay and as well as home orders and mental distress. And we surveyed around 500 individuals across the country. And I will say with my personal experience that a lot of people at that time were getting back to their backyard gardens or their balcony gardens, going back to more kind of approaches where they were making bioenzymes or farmyard manure or manure by the kitchen waste. So these are some of the practices, because it is said that unless you put your hand into soil, you will not have the kind of happy hormones. So these kind of practices were actually helping a lot of happy hormones to the people. Now, coming back to the context of growing urban sprawls and new hotspots of disasters, so Geo6 has already mentioned that Asia Pacific is a priority where there is a lot of probability of having natural disasters, and a lot of people will be facing economic losses as well as the loss of lives. And these are different pictures. You can relate. There are pictures from Hyderabad, there are pictures from Delhi, from Chennai, from Shillong, from Nainital, from Jammu and Kashmir, the Dal Lake, where this urban sprawling has actually brought a lot of pressure on these ecosystems. And the UN Habitat also report 2022 SDG 11 and IPCC has a very high confidence that there is a huge projection for global urban population to increase. And at the same time, it's relevant that we have more inclusive, safe, and resilient sustainable development in our country for especially urban areas, and how ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solution, and urban blue-green infrastructure can play a very big role. Now, urban risks are several. If I start counting, these are some that we have been studying through our organization. Loss of urban blue-green spaces. We also know solid and hazard waste is the biggest challenge, and especially landfills in the peri-urban areas or in the center of the city. Wastewater and water woes, reducing and depleting groundwater, increasing wastewater issues, heat islands, air pollution, flash floods, landslides, noise pollution. So you talk about it, you name it, our cities are center of all these kind of disasters. So few decades back, we were talking about disasters happening in natural areas, but now the urban risks are in the center of our city. So this is a very important concern that policymakers are changing, residents are facing, and also communities and academicians are facing. So from 2015 onwards, Nagpur Municipal Corporation invited us to help them with developing a proactive planning and developing a state of environment report every year. So every year we have to find a new dimension to study air environment, water, wastewater, biodiversity, climate change, and damage assessment issue. How much of damage happens if a certain ecosystem goes out of hand and it gets depleted or fragmented. So this is just a picture that I'm sure you can relate to whichever city you are joining from. So from 1990 to 2020 and even 2024, one of the greenest cities of India has now become a concretized jungle. And this is also the case of Bangalore. This is also the case of Dehradun, wherever we are studying. This is all the way similar case where green spaces are now in fragment and are no connectivity or no buffers, and they are hugely affecting the acute quality of life or human well-being. Now we also tried to see how is the concern for Nagpur. So if you see land surface temperature, overall in average, a land surface temperature of the city is lying somewhere between 40 to 42. And this is the land surface temperature, but I must tell you that every year when we go having a thermometer, handheld thermometer in hand to observe the land temperature, we sometimes even find 60 degrees centigrade temperature of the land that is not having vegetation in these areas. So blue-green spaces have a huge opportunity to reduce heat threat and also provide a lot of biodiversity co-benefits. While this is a long-term solution, I'm sure nature doesn't comes with a very subsidized short-term solution. But if you go with that long-term, I'm sure you can benefit in long-term and you can help your future generations as well. So for last few years, we're also working on understanding these 14 lakes across the city and how these blue-green buffering is there. And we developed as an important ecosystem health indicator to show that if your green space around your lakes is reducing, that also means that the future is very bleak for these lakes because these buffers will be encroached by concretization. There'll be more wastewater coming in, and slowly these lakes will be shrinking and depleting. So this becomes a very important health indicator that we developed for Nagpur, and this has also been used by a few researchers in other cities. And we also try to understand what are the demand supply. I mean, is it just academicians and people like us imposing green spaces on people while they want it or they don't want it? We also try to understand through people what is the demand supply gap across the city. Because if you see WHO and Government of India has also given guidelines. So WHO says that at least 9 meters square per capita of green space should be there in every city, while Government of India says that 10 to 12 meters square per capita. So if you see Government of India guidelines are very stringent, and this can really help. But when we started looking, first of all, we started looking to the all the public spaces because public spaces are where people can venture, residents can go and have a walk. While most of our campuses are not approachable for them because of security and other reasons. So for Nagpur, there are about 113 gardens across Nagpur. And if you see, there is so much of disparity of distribution. While certain areas that we call as posh areas have good green spaces, there are certain areas that are in the center or old Nagpur that are highly concretized, highly dense. They have disparity. And we also found that certain parks and gardens that were on the list were actually not on the ground. So that means there are serious management concerns. And we also talked about 1,500 people in the city to understand how much distance they are traveling to reach these parks. So you can understand that if a person has to travel long distance, his frequency will be less. That also means that his demand is more, but supply is less. And similarly, the accessibility is also defined by how much distance it is traveling. So if somebody has to travel more, he will take care of the season he's visiting. He will also ensure that his petrol is saved and all those concerns. So that increases the disparity and demand supply gap in the city. So this is what I mentioned that Government of India and WHO has some guidelines. And when we tested these guidelines, you will be very surprised to see some of the greenest spaces and area of Nagpur, even that don't qualify for good greenery. So the west zone of Nagpur that we call as good green zone is actually having just 2.32 meters square per capita. So this is quite less than what is projected by WHO and also Government of India. And the poorest are already the poorest with 0.27 and 0.28. So if you see, this is the state of Nagpur that we still call as green, but across the country, most of our cities are fighting and having the challenge of this demand supply gap. And then we started asking people, old people, young people, people who are going to the colleges, people who are working, work class people, what is the relevance of green spaces for them? Is it just imposed? Because we know sometimes people take it for granted and they think that plantation should be the responsibility of government. It should not my responsibility. Or we also understand there are so many disservices that keep projecting that because there are a lot of mosquitoes in rainy season, we should not plant trees. So we tried to understand all those concerns and we gave them a chart to rank their wards in green zone, orange zone, and red zone. So there was a divide of 50-50% where people thought that there are 50% wards that are still green, while they think there is a lot of improvement still needed in terms of management, regular management. There were around 44 wards close to 50 that require immediate protection of existing patches that are in orange zones and restoration of degraded areas in red zone because they were not having enough of green spaces. So while 50% were seeing that they are satisfied with the management by municipal corporation, there were another 50% who were saying that they're not satisfied. And similar was the case of air pollution and urban heat island. So people have divided, they think that the green spaces in the city are still not sufficient to give them the kind of protection they require from air pollution and urban heat islands. Another year, we started looking to city biodiversity assessment for Faridabad and Nagpur because our students were there. And this was a refined version of the previous city biodiversity index. So we tried to understand native biodiversity, the kind of ecosystem services they're providing, and the governance and management. So for the audience and researchers in this group, I must say that our cities in many levels don't have the baseline data. So if I do it now, that becomes my baseline. There is no baseline for cities. And this is one of the least considered area. It's the least bothered area that cities don't have the baseline. So ecosystem services is something that you can calculate, but you cannot create the baseline. So you have to regularly observe and develop a kind of baseline with exhaustive survey. And then the third gray area is governance and management. You still are not aware how much of budget is allocated for biodiversity as such. Then a lot of cities also don't have local biodiversity strategy and action plan. How much public awareness is happening? So these are some of the gray areas, but still we try to come up. And if you see, Nagpur also has kind of challenge. So the kind of grading, if you say for the city, is still not set a very good grading to qualify as a good city biodiversity index. And then last year, we started looking to this very interesting 3 into 30 into 300 guideline for the award that you might have seen by Cecil, Professor Cecil, who gave it in 2021. It's burning like the entire world is right now trying to understand what this 330, 300 is. And it's a very good approach for nature-based solution, integration, mainstreaming in urban areas. So the first case study that we did, I think, is the first for the country. So the 330, 300 rule says that every household should have visibility of 3 decent trees in the surrounding. Every neighborhood should have at least 30% of tree canopy. And a person or a household should have a park at least 300 meter of distance. And I think this is a quite nice approach, a formula to say that we are living in a healthy environment. So all of you, when you go back, you can look around from your window if 3 trees are existing. If you have a park just 300 meters of walk, because that's the most accessible, nice walking distance for all of you. And our findings for Nagpur say this is the publication that came just last week, and that says that there is a significant variation in urban greenness exposure across 10 municipal zones. So the low greenness zone reports say that highest tree visibility deprivation is there. So it's all below 2 trees that the people can see. There is a limited canopy cover. So it's around 7%, where we have expectation of 30%. And there is a restricted green space access. Almost over 80% of residents still lack these 300-meter of distance of green space access. So this is a situation that I'm sure is going to be very significant for different Indian cities. And our analysis shows that higher canopy cover doesn't mean that there is better visibility or accessibility, highlighting the need for integrated tree proactive tree planning strategies in the city. So that means that while we do a lot of tree census, we also have a smart planning lane wise, neighborhood wise, park wise, and so on and so forth. So this was all about the problems that we have seen and studied across in last almost a decade's time. But do we have solutions? I've been always so far have been talking about problems and also some of the solutions. So that means that urban planning and design needs to implement green space and also understanding local challenges, because nature-based solution is more about addressing local challenges, local societal challenges that can be beneficial for improving and sustaining our fast expanding cities into resilient cities. So this is one of the framework, and I'm sorry for the slide, maybe because of some technical issues, you might not be able to see the text, but this shows you the concern that green infrastructure not only gives you greenery and the kind of benefit you want, it also provides a lot of co-benefits. Having a moringa tree in your surrounding is not only giving you greenery or good carbon stock, it's also giving you food security. It might also give you health benefits, good ambience. It might also in future help you reduce a storm, reduction of, saving you from storm in an area when there is a thunderstorm. And then, of course, flash flood, because we know that soil, the roots have strong water holding capacity, and they also reduce the intensity of flash floods. So there are so many of these benefits of green infrastructure that can be integrated in urban planning and cities design. So because my education was in Dehradun and I had a strong inclination for this city, I have seen how this city went from a very beautiful retiree city now to a city that is sitting on the tipping point of disaster. So if you see the city, the green spaces have depleted, and we tried to work ward-wise to understand how this green space depletion is affecting air pollution, is also affecting groundwater depletion, and so many other concerns. And we found that there is a very strong need of improving resilience by understanding the urban challenges and having very ward-wise planning. So, for example, certain ward is having groundwater depletion because you also have a tricky terrain and topographical setup of these cities. So those kind of suggestions and solutions can be integrated at a local level. So the plan is not to only talk about nature-based solution, but also understand what ward-wise concerns are there to integrate appropriate nature-based solutions. So that also means that we have to reinvent, unlearn, learn and relearn how we can replan our growing cities. So far, what I have been working, and because we work very closely with some of the municipal corporations, I keep saying that it's very tough to bring in solution for tier one cities because they're already developed, they have very dense, very concretized. It's very tough to identify solution and then chip in those solution in their already existing planning. But there is a huge lot of opportunity for tier two cities, tier three cities that are growing very fast, where there is a lot of scope when right from the planning you can bring in all these green blue infrastructure. So that means that we have to be very flexible in our approach. We have to have a lot of redundancy in terms of capacity that is incorporated in the system. We need to have a lot of robustness, reflectiveness, resourcefulness, inclusiveness, because we need a lot of community participation, and government cannot be everywhere to implement everything. You need to have a lot of participation with academicians, scientists, NGOs, GEOs, municipal corporations, students, schools to come up with this integrated planning to have resilient cities of future. We brought in two of these important publications in last 5 years. And the reason was very straightforward. I started working in the domain of ecosystem-based approaches, I think sometime 2012 or 2013. And this was also the time when this nature-based terminology was started buzzing up. And you know that it is a product of European Union Horizon 2020 program when it was first used for urban areas in Europe. But now what I have seen in all these years, there are a lot of such solutions that our Indian or African or Latin American communities are doing and practicing. There are so many of such scattered case studies across these how do you call it, global south or developing and underdeveloped countries. The only thing is we don't know how to just bring two case studies together or how to scale up. But there are a lot of opportunities where communities, indigenous people, youth, women were participating. And then we brought in this second edition on blue-green infrastructure because I think that's very relevant for the country and also Asia to have these insights because it needs to be mainstream in policy planning also. And I'm very happy to share with all of you. This is, I think, my first webinar where I'm sharing this. You all know that IUCN brought in these these NBS principles sometime in 2016. The first technical document was in 2016. 2020 was the time when global standards were brought in. So there are 8 criteria and 48 indicators. So while some of the case studies from Asia have also qualified for nature-based solution, we felt there is a huge gap between people, and this came as a realization in 2023. I was in Kerala, invited by Kerala Municipal Corporation, where a lot of these municipal corporation from different districts were there, and I had to elaborate them about nature-based solutions. And believe me, it was a task. The reason was a lot of people could understand English, but they wanted these standards to be in local Malayalam. And that was when we decided that these standards should be at least translated in some of the potential important languages of Asia that are also shared by neighboring some of the countries, so that a lot of localization happens. People should at least know in basic what NBS are, what global standards are. And now we are talking about Global Standard 2.0. We are telling them that these standards should not be very technical. A NGO or a community-based organization with their communities can also be able to work on these standards and qualify for these standards. So this should not be just a buzzword and greenwash for industries. This should be very much available to the community as a gift of IUCN to larger community. So we had this in Hindi. We also have it in Bengali, in Malayalam, in Tamil, then also in Malay language that is spoken in Malaysia. We also have in Persian that is largely spoken in Middle East. Then we also have it in Nepali and few Marathi and few other languages. So these is all online and you can have a good look to this. And now we are coming up with some of these small videos so that will be there and communities can directly watch and understand what these global standards and NBS is all about. So unless this concept is taken to the local people, I think this will always be a buzzword. So my first task was to take this to people. So halfway we are through and we hope that we'll be further there. So these are all these volunteers from IUCN. Some of the faces they are here on my screen, but there are many people behind the screen who I don't have their pictures to show there. So they really came forward and made sure that these translations, there are 11 languages that are now online. So coming back to the urban context, I think it was also very important to understand what are the factors that shape green space interaction, because unless interaction happens, you cannot have communities joining you for these implementation. So we were having different categories, like they can be city level urban green space, they can be community level, they can be a neighborhood park, and then these interactions can be high, moderate, and low, because based on accessibility and distance, people can be there every day, can be there twice a day, can be there weekly, can be there monthly. So this engagement has to be some kind of activity. This can be sitting and relaxing, also socializing, and this differs with the age. So a purpose of a child to the park will be very different than a middle age or a health enthusiast or a sports person or an old age person, and also definitely with gender. So this all really help us to decide how can we design more accessible and more spaces that are user friendly and also helpful. So this is something. So this is what something that we could decide. And then there are multiple advantages. I mean, if you have a green space, you just don't have to bother about planting a tree. It provides you so much. But your criteria of why you are planting a certain tree in a certain locality has to be very clear. You cannot just randomly go on a plantation drive and creating some kind of a model that is more faulty. So understand the context, ensure what communities want, also ensure what kind of species are there, what kind of opportunities are there. Are we opting invasive? Are we opting native with a preference to native? And also understanding the climate sensitivity and suitability of these habitats, we need to have a planning. Now, what we saw in all these years, urban areas are no more just growing horizontally. We see a lot of vertical development happening in peri-urban areas, in the city centers. Now, this is a challenge when you talk about indices that we have been talking about, the demand supply gap. So that means that entire NBS planning has to be kind of overhauled to understand this kind of vertical greening approach, because vertical greening comes with its own cost, its own resources, and the kind of needs of these communities. So if we want to have a green roof or some kind of this kind of approach, what can be a better cost effective approach, and how much of this area in vertical uh, development should be? For example, I always say that whenever we divert a forest for a non-forested purpose, there is a 33% of compensatory afforestation that is mandatory. But what is the criteria when we have a development in urban areas? We have not decided on that. There should be some stringent guidelines. We should have some kind of a rainwater harvesting, some kind of a constructed wetland or in situ wastewater treatment, waste segregation, and also tree plantation that very much qualifies with local requirements and needs to be addressed. And in this way, we can definitely have different ideas. And I see NBS developing as a whole master's program in very, very short time. So coming toward the end of my presentation, I think some of the key pointers that you can take away from my talk can be, I see personally urban green spaces have still a lot of hope, opportunity to bridge the gap between nature and urban dwellers. If you see the kind of scenario right now we are facing, there is a lot of demand and we have to fulfill this demand. And that's where it's just not nature-based solution implemented. It's where a lot of multi-stakeholders, a lot of multiple experts, multidisciplinary expertise is required. So be it you from economics background or from ecology or biodiversity or wildlife, you all need to be there to plan and redefine and redesign your cities. And then we also need to understand that cities are expanding, so our availability of land is very, very less. So how do you make smart use of available land is another big challenge. And that's where innovators and researchers have to play a big role. With a small chunk of land, how can you make magic of providing more resilient infrastructure in the present times as well? And then how do you connect people? And when I say connect people, I mean you have to connect the next generation, a generation that is more mobile friendly, a generation that is on iPad and different social media. How do you connect back to nature? How do you inculcate a sense of place-based understanding will be very, very effective and very relevant. That's where organizations, schools, and colleges who are directly working with students have to work, bring in new projects like urbanization. When we talk about urbanization, we also talk about how these school spaces can be developed as urbanization spaces. So overall gist of what I have spoken so far, that there has to be a lot of co-planning, co-designing, and co-management required. This is where not just government has to think, there has to be a lot of private sector of financing also come in, because we all know that government's budget and money will not be sufficient to scale up and scale out all these green infrastructure efforts to overcome the demand and supply gap, to develop resilient framework for cities. So this is where a lot of private sector financing, corporate social responsibility, corporate ecological responsibility, all these aspects have to come in picture. And with this, I thank you all for your patience. It was a long talk of 1 hour, but I'm really, really thankful to everybody in GES, also especially Sonia, who made this opportunity possible. And yeah, let me know if there are certain questions that audience would like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful presentation. We really learned a lot, especially the 330 and 300 rule which you talked about. Of course, we have some question. Miss Farida has a question in the chat. She's asking for a report which can be read about the methodologies you have applied. And also she has a question upon, how does your work help feed into good policies? And have you met with the success in good policies? Farida, you can directly ask that, session is open for directly question and answer. So you can directly ask instead of chatting. Please just raise your hand so that everybody don't talk at the same time. That's the only thing.
I would love to ask it, but I have this dog who's going on screaming every time I start to ask a question. So I hope it's not too disturbing. Dr. Shalini, it was a wonderful presentation, and especially the part where you talked about your campus work that you have done. I'm very keen to see if there's a report which I could read up and understand, because we do, like I work with WWF India in Hyderabad, and we do get requests to study these large campuses. And we've done a fair amount of work on many campuses in and around Hyderabad. But your methodology sounds very fascinating and interesting, throws up a lot of interesting information which we could give to the stakeholders asked us to do the study. So that was one. And also the work which you have done on City Biodiversity Index, and I know that it has been happening even in Hyderabad. There have been 2 City Biodiversity Indexes which have been done, but I don't see that that translates into any great policy. It's good to say that I've got this number, that, that is what we got it. And post that, you don't see much happening after that. Like, it's just business as usual for the policymakers and stuff like that. So I just was keen to know, has there been any impact on that?
Thank you, Dr. Farida. I think both the questions are very important. The first is on campus. So initially, when we started, our task was not to focus a lot on publication, but gradually, like the one index that you saw, total value index for the campus, now that we are developing it for the entire urban area, having all different kind of ecosystem services into integration, so that even a very not so much educated person can apply it. So that's very much available. And I was surprised because this reached somewhere in Germany, and the professor contacted that one of the student is doing PhD and improvising it further. So I think I can share that one publication. And then last year onward, we started bringing more publications, kind of knowledge products that not only cater the impact factors and citation, but largely public. I haven't put picture, but maybe if I put picture, there was one on trees and microclimate. So this was one of the unique publication that has not been brought earlier for the country, how you can understand each tree in terms of microhabitat, apart from the benefits they have, the IUCN values. So this was released, and if you're interested, I can send across a copy on your address. So, and then we are bringing 2 more publication, and we were very fortunate that the steps that we have been taking for the last 10 years, now we have the entire monitoring happening in the campus. And we are soon going to declare our campus as a living laboratory. So that means this long-term observation will be very, very crucial in terms of how trees are helping water dynamics, eco-hydrology, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things. I'll be really glad to share the publication so far that we have brought in for Nagpur and also for Navy campus. And our website is online, our portal is online, so we can share those links also. Now, coming to this second burning question that you have asked about, how do I influence the policymakers? Now, I think this is a challenge because, you as a scientist have a job to do. And this job is to show the picture. Many times when I've developed a model, people have asked me, why didn't you just went on upscaling this model? Why did you move to? So as a scientist, I have a job to do to show this is how the models are developed. So for NMC, we are doing it for every year. So that means they have this in their understanding. These ward-wide understanding is there. Even when we did it for Dehradun, we wrote to the Dehradun Municipal Corporation showing, see, this is the real picture of the city. But depends on how they want it, because it's again a tussle in the country, development versus environment. And I'm sure this particular stage, development has been given priority because of course, human rights and all those issues. Everybody has to have access to the development. Our take has been always that while we do development, we cannot ignore development. But at the same time, how do you pace up with also environment? Because sooner or later we have to face this brunt. And I'm sure the time is now, we're already facing the brunt. So NMC, for example, I haven't received any communication so far from Dehradun Municipal Corporation to understand. And if I see on the other side of the table also, it's not that easy to implement these solutions. To really retrofit these cities with the solution requires budget, requires good amount of money. And if you see the recent report of NBS, if you invest thousand something crores, you can get 550 crores of benefits every year. But I don't know how many municipal corporations have that kind of budget to
Money.
invest. Yeah, but I see that there are initiatives. I should not undermine what government is doing at this point also. I see some of the places where they're putting up models are quite nice, replicative, interesting models. But how do you scale up is a challenge? Again, it's a big challenge. So I don't know with my work, if I get to know that people read it, people like it, and I do my effort in replicating and identifying all those things that can help the policy makers, help the country, and the municipal corporation. So my effort goes in. But if you wish to understand the changes happening as it is, I think it will take time sooner or later. I just can hope for that. Thank you.
I just had one this thing to let you know that for the last 2 years, we have started something called Hyderabad Trees, a Hyderabad Annual Trees and Biodiversity Study, which we've been doing through a citizen science approach. And it's very interesting to see the results that we have. And I'll share one of the things with you, and maybe you might be interested to. I would love to get inputs from you on how can we make it better, make it more robust, because I've been feeding this into the government, saying that exotic versus native species of trees and how they actually are the ones which are prone to storms and falling down and things like that. So I would love to get some inputs from you on this. I'll share what we have from our findings. So just to let you
So
know that.
maybe while I can have a separate meeting for that, what I could very briefly mention is I think during COVID, there was a decision by Honorable High Court of Madras that gave the decision to fell all the precipice trees across Tamil Nadu because they were depleting groundwater. But and the report came for review to us, and we made a clear statement. Unless we understand this entire problem completely, we should not make a decision because felling the entire tree across the state is not a wise decision. The reason is if you understand if I say the tree is depleting groundwater, that means I have understanding on tree roots, how deep they are going. And if you, for your understanding, India doesn't have enough of understanding on tree root. We don't have tree root images. We just have speculations. They grow deep to the water table or they don't do. Most of these tree roots are in the vadose zone of soil. So that's why we started another study on understanding tree root imaging. And we were very fortunate because NIRI stands for multidisciplinarity. We have these geophysicists working with us while they were using ground penetrating radar for their own purposes. I requested them, why don't you use it for tree root imaging also? And that's where we got the first study from India to compare a native and an invasive species. And the second study that we are doing is on groundwater dependent vegetation because this all work has been done nicely across the world. If you see this data scarcity is significant. So my argument is unless and if you know forest department gets really offended if you criticize them with the kind of plantation, and I think that that's not a right move to do that unless we can prove it that invasive species because it's climate change, the things are going to be here. You want it or you don't want it. So recently I was in one of the countries where there is very high biosecurity. But if you have high biosecurity, that means you have high budgetary provision also to control that invasive species are. And if you see countries' biosecurity, it's not that strong. And by now, we already have thousands of species. The only wise thing that we can make is we don't plant any more invasive
New
species. That is what we can do now. Instead of keep criticizing what has been done 60 onwards for social forestry, the only wise step can be this and see how these invasive species can be made of use of. You see the story of lantana, you see the story of Eichhornia, how this is happening. The only wise step can be not to put money in moving the task uphill, but trying to see how best we can manage it. So while we did a lot earlier in terms of disturbing everything, our task is now to make wise choices, not just greenery, a greenery that's more sustainable, That's all supporting to local needs and requirement. That's what NBS also says. Address societal challenges and accordingly plan what you have. And regarding your concerns, I think we'll be really happy to share some of the insights on what we do for Nagpur for your work in Hyderabad.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Shalini ma'am, we have another question from Helioza. What methodologies can be incorporated for identifying a new site for green space, specifically in terms of suitability analysis?
Can you repeat this question? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, she is asking what methodology can be incorporated for identifying a new site for green space, specifically in terms of suitability analysis?
I think this is a very important question that so far I have been always thinking in India when we do plantation, we never think about land suitability classification. We just go on plantation. We see a site that is degraded, we go on plantation. But I think 2 years back, as a visiting scientist to CIFOR, when I worked in one of the areas in Bali, I get to understand that plantation is much more than just planting trees. We need to understand land suitability classification. And land suitability is just not one component. It's a composition of 7 or 8 different uh, soil characteristics, drainage characteristics of soil, land characteristics. So that all is basically required to see how best this can be addressed. So once we have clarity on land suitability classification, so this gives you an understanding if certain area actually is very, very unsuitable for planting horticulture or planting certain kind of timber species, or they are highly degraded area. So land suitability classification can really help. And after land suitability classification, you should also check plant suitability. And in that condition, I think you should have a clear understanding of not just imposing what you want in that area, but also sit with the local people. And when I developed my first nature-based solution, I think I didn't try to impose my scientific understanding on the topic because I am in that landscape for just 4 or 5 years. These communities are there for hundreds of years. So sitting with them, hybridizing the knowledge system, their indigenous knowledge or local knowledge systems can be hybridized with scientific and technical knowledge, can actually bring a lot of kind of breakthrough in how we plan plantation. So I think that's a very important question and very relevant. And through this webinar, if somebody talks about land suitability and plant suitability, I think this is worth a talk to understand. And this is also what nature-based solution talks about. It's a 5 criteria aspect where you should know what kind of landscape you have because nature-based solution are to be applied at landscape level only, not ecosystem level. And when you know the landscape, you should know what kind of structure and function these landscape are providing. So what kind of projection you are planning, like in short term and long term, what kind of changes you are planning. So spatio-temporal understanding is also required. So mix of all of these 5 criteria indicators can help you in nature-based solution. And I am really glad that somebody is thinking about land suitability and plant suitability also. I hope I addressed the concerns.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have another question from Shruti Srivastava. She is asking that altogether you have said that tier 1 cities are already planned. We cannot do much work with them, but she's telling we cannot ignore them completely either. So what approaches can we have specifically for tier 1 cities?
So I didn't say that it is impossible. I just said it is really tough. You see the example of Delhi, or even if you see example of your old city where old Nagpur or Dr. Farida sitting in Hyderabad, the old Hyderabad, or your old uh, Ahmedabad place, it will be really, really tough to directly go in for some kind of plantation. You don't have enough of space for such thing. And if you bring in more complicated NBS solution, how do you plan to have? And that was also the same kind of concern when I said you want to go for vertical NBS. Your cities are now more expanding horizontally, where one house after one house is coming. It's just coming in the form of 2 tier, these high rises building. So how do you address it? So some kind of retrofitting is required, and also some kind of how we plan buildings, more green buildings, and also ensuring that your more of the space can be kept green. There are multiple examples internationally where you see these balconies or rooftop gardens are doing well. But for your independent individual 2 BHK, 1 BHK, 3 BHK, how do you plan? In a similar way, your old cities and tier 1 cities have to be planned very carefully. And for example, if you take Chandni Chowk or some other highly congested market in Delhi, how do you plan for these things? Everything is concretized. So that means you cannot dismantle these solutions, these infrastructure. But what you can do is you can introduce some kind of green spacing. It can be vertical, it can be on pods. And then how do you balance your heat islands? How much of heat island is there? What is your idea how much of temperature reduction and improvement and microclimate you are planning, and how much all is required to fulfill that kind of demand? This all has to go in planning, and this means this is not just urban planning. This is where a person from physics background who understand metrology, mathematical modeling, they all have to come together to understand if I have to reduce this much of heat island, how much of trees have to be there. And I see some of the good publications already coming from IIT Bombay and all those aspects. And I was very surprised that mathematical modeling entering these urban greening and nature-based solution. But you can see some of these interesting publications. That's why I'm saying it's not impossible, but not that easy at the moment. If I give you just one or two lame example, it will be not right on my part. So there has to be very effective scientific planning to come up with these kind of solutions, even for tier 1 cities. It's not impossible. It has its own cost to come and improve the cities. While for tier 2 and tier 3, you have spaces, you can plant, you can still see where your gardens can come up, where your avenue stations can up. You have a lot of scope for tier 2 and tier 3. That's why I'm just saying that you need to start thinking on every year, every census when you're graduating and having more tier 2 and tier 3. You have a clear focus, government, municipal corporation, how to understand these projections for future of increasing population, and how do you understand these future challenges can be reduced by your NBS planning for these cities?
Thank you so much, ma'am. This brings our another question. Like Shweta is asking, do you come across for any mechanism for mobilizing the communities? Because definitely NBS involve a lot of mobilization of communities. So, is there any particular mechanism?
I think for last 10 plus years have trying to do a lot of capacity building and also mobilizing communities. So my experience with NBS goes back to 2009 to 2016. And I must say this was in with rural communities, and a lot of work has to do being done on trust building, because communities like us have complex psychologies. They want a lot of trust building. So that means that a lot of time goes in trust building and showing them this project has benefits for you. And this doesn't happen overnight. Maybe in a year or two, when they start seeing the benefit, that's when they start joining you. They see some monetary benefits, they see incentives. And similar is the case for urban area. Let me tell you, who will come and join your efforts if you're not having incentives? Why person is, even a poorest of poor person is going to leave the day job to come and join you for NBS interventions. Even if you see, you have to be very, very practical in that thinking. So community mobilization is important. I work with communities, and for last 10 years, at least for last post-COVID, I have been putting my energy to mobilize more of my knowledge and community awareness on nature-based solution, ecosystem-based projections, and how they can be well integrated. So this is what I have done in last couple of years, and I hope that has made some relevance to their understanding of NBS and also mainstreaming biodiversity for decision making.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Jaydeep is asking, I'm sure that question has been already answered, but he is asking that what should be the approach to achieve the goal of climate resilient city when we have almost no space like Old Delhi to develop any blue-green space? The question has already been answered, but you can definitely elaborate on Jaydeep's question.
Yeah. Hi, Jaydeep. Good to have this question from you. I think this will be a target to achieve the goal of climate resilient city. But I will not say we have, I mean, I mean, the kind of question like it's impossible. It's not impossible. I have already mentioned, but there are still opportunities. You can have potted plants. You can have vertical gardens, not being raised by fresh water, but recycled water in these cities. And then the experiences and examples of constructed wetland might be really challenging because you don't have enough of space. But I think, how do you see the airports? They are all concretized. India has some of the biggest and best examples of greenery inside concretization. You see the airport of Bangalore, you see the airport of Mumbai or Delhi. They are now more coming like gardens and museums and whatnot in these areas. So I think there are opportunities, and government is already very keen about, because the image of Delhi goes loud outside when visitors are coming to India. So while our airport is very good, at least this 10, 15, 20 kilometer when you enter Delhi is very good in terms of gardening. And I must say that anybody going to Delhi can see that kind of face. But when you talk about Chandni Chowk or any other space, I think, yes, gradually what will happen is these most of these areas that are illegally occupied, they will be taken away. And then these spaces will be developed to develop some kind of blue green space. But again, this decision has to come from the government and how Delhi government is taking up. But yes, you also know he has been an ex-Navy person and he knows that a lot of Delhi government's efforts have been into cleaning the wetland, bringing a lot of green spaces in the city, and also using nature-based solutions for addressing air pollution, wastewater treatment, and so on and so forth. I hope this helps and addresses your concerns.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I have a question, ma'am. Like, are there any studies on the threshold and the carrying capacity of urban green infrastructure before they start degrading? Like, are there any such studies? Because the NBS, of course, it's a solution, but I'm sure it will also have some carrying capacity, or it will also have some thresholds.
So I think even if you see generally these, the spatio-temporal imagery, I did this study on Dehradun, and when I'm saying you the imagery, and because you come from you're sitting in Gandhinagar or Ahmedabad, I didn't brought in those images, but usually I plan to take these city images. If you see Bangalore, early 70s, Bangalore was 97% green and 3% concretized. You see the image of 2022, it's 97% concretized and 3% green. So now you can understand that it has already crossed in carrying capacity and the indicators are already there. You see groundwater has completely depleted. There is a zero depth condition coming in. Every city talks about how much of water is there in the reservoir before monsoon comes in. For example, they say that, okay, we can survive up to July or we can survive up to, and then water rationing starts in Gujarat also this happens. So that already means there is an indirect, or you see it as a direct indicator that we are already at the tipping point. So my study uh, for Dehradun already said that we are already sitting at a tipping point because you cannot dismantle a city. There will be always a disaster and then everything washes out. You see the example of Chennai, how wetlands were used and they were used for constructing buildings. And then you see Delhi also. So these examples are not limited to one city. They are everywhere across the country. So once we have this kind of experience, I mean, we are already at the tipping point. There will be no separate study to show us that our carrying capacity. So we did a study by Honorable High Court of Nainital, Uttarakhand, for the lakes, 7 lakes of Nainital. You have Nainital, Sattal, Bhimtal, all these 5 to 7 lakes are there. And the study was on bearing capacity of lakes, and we gave a clear thing that tourism should be stopped because there is a lot of infrastructure development that is hampering the subsurface flow. There is a lot of vegetational changes happening. But these kind of decisions are very strong decisions to be made. Your pressure in urban areas are now diverted during holidays or good seasons to hill stations nearby or pleasant rural area nearby. So the pressure is actually increasing pressure on peri-urban and rural areas. So I keep talking about this. Few generations back, our parents, our forefathers came to urban areas because they thought that money will bring mental satisfaction and well-being. Now our generation is going back to plow the field, to have a staycation in the area where there is no connectivity. So did they have committed something wrong, or now we are thinking going back to nature can bring us mental and psychological benefits? So the conclusion what I want to make at this point to your question is that we are already at the tipping point. You see now, I mean, is there way to bring that entire greenery back? It's not a year of work, not 10 years of work. There has to be continuous efforts, very proactive, not only from government or municipal corporation, but also from public to ensure there are 3 trees in their vicinity. How many people have these 3 trees? How many people with those small households want to have trees? We don't have space. We don't have trees. And then we put pressure on the government. We don't have trees. So we are already at the tipping point. There is no more any imaginary tipping point that is we are going to come to. We are already there. Someday you will hear that we are having zero depth. We are indirectly already facing zero depth in our cities. Water is being rationed, things are being, and the pressure is not for people like us who have this buying power. The problem is with the people who are settling up near the river banks, near the wetland buffer zones, the marginalized, the poor, the immigrants. The pressure comes on them. So the disparity that I'm talking about has not integrated this disparity that is existing. And disparity is very, very high for poorest of poor people, where greenery is the last thing to be thought about. Greenery is the last thing on their agenda.
That's true, ma'am. Actually, I was about to ask like how this will bring a socio-economic, inequality if we go and start implementing like all this thing. That was the thing. But thank you so much. You have answered. And like people are asking for your email address. So like with your permission, if you're okay, I can share in this thing, or I can share the chat, or I can either share
I
with them.
think I have given it on my last slide also. I'm sharing it here. I'm sharing in the chat box. You can use S_Dhyani. That can help. That was also on my last slide.
Ma'am, if you can reshare the last slide, it will be easy for them. Everyone can take a screenshot for the last slide. Any of the recording will be available on YouTube channel, but for immediate email, you can check the chat box or you can take a screenshot of the last slide.
Is it visible for you all? Okay, just
Ma'am, now it is visible.
I'll go to the last slide.
Yes.
Prefer my official email address. That will be better. S_.
And many people are thanking you for the informative session, and it was a eye-opening session. Dr. Farida is saying that she would love to stay connected to you. So lots of thanks pouring into the chat box. You can check it out. If anybody is having any other question, you can ask. We are still open. And if not, then I would like to invite Dr. Deepa Gowli for vote of thanks.
I think there's another important last question which has come. Just
Shanti is asking, can you please answer this question? What do you think are the main benefits of developing remote or less accessible regions like Great Nicobar Island development project in 2021?
I think I'll be not the right person to comment on that. I mean, if you want to have a very independent kind of comment, because I think the strategic requirements will always be there, the country, and also development require. I said it in the very beginning. It's very tough to make choices, development of environment and going with the environment development. While as a environmentalist, I have been always against the kind of plantation and degradation that happens in the country. So Great Nicobar is again one of the most sad part. Even sometimes I feel when I go to protected areas where less tourists are coming, I want no tourists should be coming in these areas because more tourists means more degradation. How mountains have become, how your local hill stations have become, lots of crowd coming in. So one more good airport means more people coming in, and maybe some of the virgin parts of these islands will be lost. And India is one of the very fortunate countries to have these very pristine islands with a lot of beautiful mangroves. So I think as an individual scientist, I really am not supporting the kind of development, but I'm not the right person at the same place because I have not been having a very great in understanding of this project and the reasons behind having this, because I'm sure it might not just be the tourism. There might be more strategic reasons behind it. And because we do comment to a lot of these strategic concerns, so I think my job is just to say that, yeah, working on mangroves. We recently did this West Coast, and Gujarat was one of it. And we know that how much of pressure is on mangroves, because of salt making, a lot of salinity ingress is happening. Loss of industrialization is taking a lot of pressure on these mangroves. And then when people are always thinking about East Coast, that is having a lot of this cyclone intensity increasing, let us not think that West Coast is not vulnerable. Now the temperature of Arabian Sea has already rise by 1.5 degrees centigrade. So let's not take it very casually, but I think there should be a right person to take this message to the policymakers for them to understand as well. And we don't know the reasons behind it. It's very important and very easy to criticize. But unless we are not in those shoes, we don't know what exactly to say.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm sure you answered. And again, people are, ma'am, just this last question. Yeah. NBS require continuous support from the community. Any suggestions on the same? TS Veeramani is asking that NBS require continuous support from the community, engaging the local community effectively. She's asking, if not wrong, Veeramani, you are asking about the, methodologies or methods by which you can engage the local community effectively on a long-term basis, right? That's what I understood from the question.
If this is the question,
Best
I
practices.
think
Yes.
best practices. I think if this is the question, the only way to work with the community is to have patience. They are humans like us. They have same psychologies that we and you are having. Being understanding, encouraging, respecting their thoughts, their culture, their views and mindset. I think that's the way. You have to keep your science and mental whatever you have achieved to one side when you go and work with the communities. And you have to be very continuous with that kind of approach for a very long time to build that trust and motivation with them. And that's when they start getting the benefits. So if they have the trust, they see the results coming in. 1 to 2 to 3 years you will take in just that trust building. So I think you should read some of these very good papers by Dr. D.N. Pandey, who was one of the senior IFS with Rajasthan cadre, and gave some of the very good approaches. I mean, very, very layman approaches, Namaste, Halchal, and Dana Pani approach. If you reach from Namaste to Dana Pani, when you can sit with the communities to eat with them, that's when the trust is built up. So I don't think there is any good library that can teach you, any good teacher who can teach you how to go for best uh, these approaches of sitting and working with the community. It comes with the practice. It comes with your own customized approaches on working with, but you need a whole lot of patience. And somebody enters your house, what kind of patience you need to work with them or they need to have with you? Because why will you spare your time to just take this with that complex approach? I think it takes time and you need to respect even if it is taking time. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Farida is also saying the same. It's a long journey.
Yeah.
So may I
Yeah.
request everyone to please switch on the cameras for a group photograph before we enter into the vote of thanks. Please switch on your cameras once for group photograph. We are about to, wrap up the webinars.
We didn't wear our makeup properly today.
But still, you all are looking fabulous.
So good to see all these faces joining from different places. I thank you all for joining. I mean, I am really glad that you could have some time to join.
Absolutely, ma'am. It takes really effort to invest in your own growth, like taking out time and starting.
Yeah, I see some of them are traveling. So this really makes this special. Thank you so much for joining from these far places and your journey.
Thank you so much. And I now hand over to Dr. Deepa Gowli for a vote of thanks. And thank you, ma'am, for a wonderful session and everyone who joined us and, make this more engaging. Over to you,
Thank
Dr. Deepa.
Thank you, Dr. Shalini. It was very, very interesting. And as you see the discussions, even the interactions with the were very good. I would like to tell you are very lucky. You have at least 2.3 green space per capita. Vadodara has only 0.17 square meter. So you can just imagine, and we at a semi-arid region where we need the green space the more, we are having the least. So even coming to your policy, I think we have to have a concrete policy where there is random conversion of the green spaces. Since Vadodara is in type 2 city, so they are converting the green spaces which was there in the urban planning into the non-green space. So how do we do this? Maybe whenever next policy, when you are into it, just see to that this is sealed somewhere. Otherwise, even in Vadodara, though there are groups which fight against the green spaces like allocation to other uses, but it does not always come out. So this is one sector which has to be. And another flag, which is another important area which I would flag is concretization of the ponds or the lakes. So this is another area which has to, because without the green cover around the green, when it is concretized, you can see it's all gone. The green spaces is totally gone. Same thing is happening with the river fronts. So these are the small green spaces which were there in the cities or in the tier 2, tier 1 cities. Those green spaces are there, but they're slowly being converted towards concretization. So this is a suggestion from my side that somewhere a policy has to come up on this, because the river, water and the community, that connect is very important. If we lose that connect, the people and the water and the river, so that connection is lost somewhere. And that's how we are even losing the green spaces more rapidly, especially since I'm in Vadodara for last 25 years. I'm seeing this happening. And it hurts also. We see lot number of trees being cut. So anyway, your NBS, and I would appreciate that you have brought the NBS guidelines in 11, 12 languages. That's very excellent. So the more if you can bring in other curriculum in Gujarat, like it's in Gujarat, if it can come up in Gujarati, so it will be really useful for us. We can share with the policy makers. Right now, though we raise a voice, somehow we get lost in this efforts. And GS for the last 10 years is working into implementation and to the green cover increase, our restoration projects. So that's an effort which we are doing for last 10, 15 years. We have done good restoration projects. And certainly NBS is the guideline which we follow, and the community participation. So, and thanks for giving such an good information, and even the everyone has liked it so much. And I hope we continue, and maybe we invite you once again, maybe after some time, and with new topic, and especially on the blue-green zones, how the integration of that has to be done, and with the policies, like how the policy can make an impact on these sectors. So it's a very, thank you so much for dedicating and giving an 1.5 hours time is not an easy for being a scientist. I can understand the pressure, the workload which you have, but certainly you have dedicated time, and GS is thankful for all your time and all your good informations which you have shared. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, once again. So with that, we officially close the webinar. The webinar recording will be available on our YouTube channel as soon as we will upload. We will definitely give a mail to you. A big thanks to Shalini ma'am, to Deepa ma'am, to Farida ma'am, to everyone who joined us today on this beautiful journey and celebrating Earth Day, giving your time itself. It shows that you care about our nature. And thank you so much. So you all please log off. Like as the webinar is over, I will leave as soon as the last person will leave. So you may log off from your devices.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.
So many messages are pouring, ma'am. It was such a wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. Give a pat to yourself. We took our time. Kamlesh. So thank you so much, Kamlesh ji, for joining us from Forestry Department. This is not the platform, Kamlesh ji, to talk about this thing. You can connect to us on our official email IDs. Department. Thank you so much. Rahul ji, for joining us. Thank you. I request everyone, please log off as the webinar is over.